Having said all that, I want to welcome you back to our Heart Smart program. Today, we're going to cover a very important but also confusing topic. I think when we look at all of the information that exists about dieting, everyone really seems to have an opinion about what's going to work best. And I think this slide here captures the heart of the issue when we look at what's really happening out there. More people have a difficult time doing their taxes or figuring out how to do their taxes and they do trying to eat healthier. So that's kind of where we are. So you'd rather do your taxes than try to figure out what to eat. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. In terms of heart disease preventions, there are some very specific steps that you can take to lower your risk for heart disease. And some of them aren't as obvious or aren't as widely shared. So that's what I want to focus in on, making sure you leave here today with some actionable steps that you can take based on what the research is showing, not based on what your neighbor is doing, your aunt, your uncle, people at church, or people around the neighborhood, but what the science is actually showing. And again, what we want to try to do is make sure you leave here with some actionable ideas to get this started. I'll also be sharing with you at the very end some resources for recipes, because obviously the heart of the matter is not just having food that's healthy for us, but also food choices that are going to be tasty. So, when we look at what we're trying to do today, this is a very important topic when we look at heart disease prevention, and that's trying to arrive at a healthy weight. And I'm going to share with you what those numbers should try to look like. And it may surprise you in just how much a small weight change can impact your health long term. So we're not talking about losing 50 or 100 pounds. We're talking just a very small percent can go a long way at helping you come off or even reduce the dosages of some of your blood pressure medications. But I wanted to take a moment and follow up from last week. So we didn't really have a formal homework assignment, but what I was kind of asking you, and again, we're kind of on mute right now, but I want you to think about what you noticed about your habits. And for those habits that you're trying to really modify, give thought as to, what purpose they're serving. Meaning, if you're coming home after a stressful day and you find yourself wanting to eat potato chips or ice cream, give some thought as to why that is. Attack that primary motivator or that primary modifier, and then you have much greater likelihood of really changing the habits. And then the other thing, just to follow up from last week, is that take a look at the environment. So if you're trying to look at physical activity patterns, how are you setting up your routine? Are you parking further away? Are you taking the stairs? Are you doing some of those elementary things that can really put you in a position to move more? For nutrition, when we're looking at food choices, what does the kitchen have in stock for you? What does the cafeteria menu plan look like for you? What do your lunch menu ideas look like for the following week? So that's what we want to try to look at when we say, all right, what about my environment is shaping myself up to succeed? Because remember, it's going to be easier to flex that willpower muscle the less often you have to use it, because eventually we're going to yield to that temptation. So if we're putting ourselves in a position where we're not exposed to that temptation, whether it's inactivity, whether it's high fat, high calorie food choices, we want to make sure that our environment is going to help set us up for success. So that's just some background information about where we've gone so far talking about healthy habit formation. But I also like to start this class, since we are talking about weight management, with just some basic nutrition questions. So these are some things that you can just answer to yourself. I'd like to know which of these macronutrients, so that's where we get calories from the food choices we make every day, which has the most calories per 1 gram serving. So we've got alcohol, got carbohydrates, fat, and protein. So they each provide a certain number of calories per gram. And the one that has the most calories per gram by far is going to be fat. So when we look at healthy weight management, we still need to pay close attention to our fat consumption. Yes, there are certain types of fats that are healthy for our heart, like olive oil, avocados, walnuts, and other nuts. But those still have a considerable amount of calories, and it's going to cease being healthy for your heart if it's putting you in a position where you're going to be over consuming calories. So it's very important. So it still does come down to calories. Now, true or false, certain foods such as grapefruit and celery help the body burn fat. So the idea here is that just by eating these foods, it's going to make your body burn fat. So think for a moment. And if you said false, you're on the right track. There's actually no food that's going to burn fat. So when we talk about burning fat, something called thermogenesis, this is occurring during physical activity, during bodily movement. There's a mistaken notion that because the digestion and absorption of things like celery and other rough vegetables, they actually cost more calories than they are your body stores. That's not entirely true. Although celery is low in calories and it's going to be a good part of any well balanced diet, just like any fruit or vegetable, it isn't going to, in and of itself, make you burn fat. The same with grapefruit. Just eating grapefruit doesn't burn fat. True or false, apple cider vinegar is an effective weight loss aid. So think for a moment about that. And if you said false, you're on a roll. So, yes, there has been some small studies done that showed that people who consumed a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar before their meals had a small weight reduction over a brief period of time. I think it was 6 or 8 weeks, but long term, it didn't really have any impact. And the idea here was that there's nothing to do so much with the vinegar as far as being responsible for the weight loss directly, but the fact that it tasted so terrible, the participants didn't have much of an appetite, induced them to eat a little bit less. So, bottom line, not really effective, and it's not going to help you lose much weight in the long run. All right, last one. And for those of you that attended some of our other heart disease awareness classes and blood pressure classes, you might know the answer to this already, but high fructose corn syrup is more fattening than regular cane sugar or the raw sugar that you might see advertised on food labels. Is this true or false? So, this also is false. So when we look at sweeteners like corn syrup and like cane sugar, like dextrose, like modified cornstarch, anything that's used to add sweetness to foods, same goes true for honey. They all have the same amount of calories. So if we're having them in excess, they're going to make us gain weight. So there is a very small difference, in fact, between high fructose corn syrup and cane sugar when we look at it from a chemistry standpoint. Both high fructose corn syrup and cane sugar are comprised of glucose and fructose molecules. Just by nature, high fructose corn syrup has slightly higher amounts of fructose in its concentration relative to glucose. It's about 55 to 45 in terms of percentage versus cane sugar, which is more 50-50. So, in other words, not much of a difference biochemically when we look at them. And in terms of nutritional impact, both of those should be limited in our diets. Just if you see something advertised, oh, now made with real cane sugar, that's just a marketing claim. That's not anything to do with its overall healthfulness. And that's important to understand because a lot of what's being pushed out there in terms of nutrition and weight management or quote unquote healthfulness is just based on loud claims. All right. Just loud marketing. And I think this slide sums it up perfectly because it still comes down to science, it still comes down to facts. Facts matter. This cartoon does a pretty good job of explaining where we are, where we are in terms of scientific evidence. Say, I'm sorry, Gina, your answer was correct, but Kevin shouted his incorrect answer above yours, so he gets the point. So, in terms of heart disease prevention, ladies and gentlemen, it still comes down to science. So, let's take a look at what the science shows regarding healthful weight management. So there was research done, I think, 2 years ago from the Journal of the American Medical Association that compared several popular weight loss schemes to each other to see which one produced the most amount of weight lost over a given point in time. So at 6 months, participants who were on the Atkins diet lost 22 pounds. And then you can see the other numbers for some other name programs out there, Volumetrics, the Ornish diet, the Zone diet. Weight Watchers, Rosemary Conley, which I believe that's a program out of Great Britain, Jenny Craig. So you've seen most of these names before and you're familiar with their overall principles. And you can see, they've all led to some weight loss, but by far, it appeared that the Atkins diet triggered the most. So this low carb approach triggered the most weight loss in this select study. So before you jump online and order your Atkins diet cookbook, the other thing this study pointed out is that after that 6 month period and going into a year, it didn't really matter what program those people followed. They lost about the same amount of weight. And that's an important thing to point out here, because what we find is that no matter what approach you choose to embrace, whether it's Atkins, whether it's Weight Watchers, whether it's the zone diet, whether it's just a healthier approach to eating using some Harvard healthy eating principles, if you are paying attention to your eating patterns and being consistent with it, you are going to see some weight loss. So there really isn't one program that's head and shoulders above the best or above the rest. When we look at weight loss, the most effective program is the one that you can sustain. So when we look at healthy eating, we need to make sure you're finding the right approach to eating where you still like your life. So if you put yourself on a hyper regimented program with very minimal flexibility, yeah, you might lose some weight, but if you're off of it after 3 pounds because you're 3 months because you're frustrated, it's not going to be helpful long term. So, and that's where some of the confusion lies. We have a good understanding of what unhealthy is, chicken and biscuits and fried chicken and sugar sweetened beverages and pies and such. But when we talk about healthy food, it's not as clear. And that's what I want you to walk away from today is I want you to try to get out of the mindset that food is either healthy or unhealthy. And instead, I want you to look at food as to what it represents overall. What is the pattern of your overall diet? What are the types of choices that you're making? Yes, one single glazed donut, we could largely vote and say, yeah, that's probably unhealthy. But can you have a healthy diet and have a glazed donut? Yes. So that's where the confusion arises. Overwhelmed at the number of choices, overwhelmed at the nutrition claims. I think you can serve yourself well if you get out of this black and white mindset for healthy food choices and just stick to patterns of food choices. What are the patterns of your food choices showing you? Okay. That pattern of food selections that's giving your body your best balance of nutrients that's going to either maintain or improve your physical and mental well being. That's my definition of healthy eating. We're going to look at what those types of food selections can be if we're looking to improve blood pressure, if we're looking to improve cholesterol. But remember, healthy eating should afford you some flexibility too. So don't adapt a mindset that you have to eat 100% of the time one specific way. Healthy eating should involve some flexibility, but it's also important to understand what are the big items when we look at what should be selected for those food choices. And that's what I hope we take away from today's class. So if we look at the reasons why we eat what we eat every day, every one of these is a very valid reason. I mean, you could be skipping lunch right now and now you're just hungry. So that's why you're going to eat. And you could be bored. You could need a boost of energy. You could be stressed out. Could be somebody's birthday. Um, the food is there, it's free. All these things are valid reasons. But time and time again, when we look at why people select the food that they select each and every day, it ultimately comes down to one common characteristic: taste. You eat the food you eat every day because it tastes good to you. So, what we have to do with this class is make sure you understand, okay, here are some foods that can be part of those healthful food pattern selections, those healthy food choices, and here's how it can taste for you. And that's why I think the cookbook that we're going to send this afternoon is a good complement to this class, because it can give you some different ideas of some flavorful foods that still fall within those guidelines for heart disease prevention. If we look at dietary guidelines for Americans and pick this up and wonder, gosh, what should I be eating? And we've looked at the My Plate before, and basically the consensus is we should be eating more fruits, more vegetables, We should be eating less sugar, less sodium, less saturated fat. But when we look at what we should not be eating, that's where it gets a little more vague. Saturated fat is cited as a nutrient we should restrict, but the number one source of saturated fat in the American diet is cheese. So if you ask yourself, gosh, wouldn't it be a lot easier just to tell Americans, hey, back off on the cheese? Well, when we look at how these guidelines are commonly constructed, since there is such a large industry influence, that's where you see the waters become somewhat muddied. So at the end of the day, you are still going to have to look out for yourself in order to identify healthful foods. And that's why I said, in addition to having flexibility, your healthful eating plan should still enable you to enjoy your life. Okay. So now don't get me wrong, if you want to make changes to your weight, to your blood pressure, to your cholesterol, you will have to change your approach to eating, but that approach should still permit you some flexibility. The more you're looking to change in terms of weight overall, the more habits you'll have to change too. But we can go a long way for health improvement with just a small amount of weight loss, as I'll show you in a moment. So, without boring you to tears about all the different nutrients in food, I still think it's helpful to understand, just from a basic science perspective, everything we eat is giving us some type of nutrients into our diets. Nutrients do one of three things. They'll either give us some energy so we can get through the day, give us structure to our cells and fuel body processes. Those are what we look to achieve from the foods that we select every day. So if we aren't getting enough of those nutrients, not getting in enough of those foods, that's where our health could suffer as well. So what we want to look at is make sure when we look at those key nutrients, we're trying to achieve balance and making sure we get a variety of foods, because it gives us the vitamins we need, the minerals we need. We already talked about the energy nutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fat, but these are the 6 key nutrients. And what I want you to understand here is that when we say the word energy, so a food has a certain amount of energy, that means it's also providing you calories. All right. So carbohydrates provide energy because they have calories. Protein provides energy because it has calories. Fat provides energy because it has calories. And of course, the highest concentration of calories too. So it's important to understand what those 6 nutrients are. Of course, the most vital of us in terms of overall life is going to be water. But from a weight management standpoint, you could argue that looking closely at the amount of added fat in our diet is still going to be a good tool for long-term weight reduction. Not the only tool, but we still have to be mindful of that. So we're going to emphasize heart healthy fats, but we also want you to be aware of the calories. So you talk a lot about the pattern of nutrients, and you look at the dietary guidelines for American talked about getting a certain amount of fat and trying to, eat a certain amount of protein, certain amount of carbohydrates. But the truth is, when we go shopping, we eat foods. We don't eat nutrients. There isn't a protein section of the supermarket. There's not a carbohydrate section of the supermarket. There isn't a fat section of the supermarket. So what I want you to understand here is that we're still eating real foods. We don't eat actual nutrients, and there really isn't an ideal ratio for these macronutrients when we look at heart disease prevention. Several years ago, when I was first learning about heart disease management and heart disease prevention, the emphasis was all about fat. Just keep it low fat and everything will be fine. Unfortunately, we learned when we kept everything low fat, we added more refined carbohydrate, and that only made our heart disease issues even worse. So now we're looking at, well, let's make everything high in fat and no carbohydrate. But yet there's still not enough evidence to show that that's going to be effective long term. And what we've seen through the weight management research, just from that Journal of the American Medical Association study I shared with you, there really isn't an ideal ratio. So each of you listening to this program could follow 20 different ratios of those macronutrients on your screen and still achieve success with weight loss. So don't let anyone tell you that this is the ideal ratio, because there is no scientific evidence to establish that as the fact. What we do know is that when we look at patterns of food selection, so again, getting away from the macros mindset and how much carbohydrate, protein, fat I should achieve, if we can set up our plates similar to what we see on the screen. So this is the Harvard healthy eating plate. And I like this better from an educational perspective than the traditional My Plate, which just really lists vegetables, fruits, grains, and protein. I like this approach because it actually gives you some specific ideas, talking about the distribution between vegetables and fruits and why our primary beverage should be just water, tea, or coffee, why we should eat a variety of whole grains, not refined grains, but they should all be whole grains, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, brown rice. Limit significantly that refined grain because it lacks the dietary fiber. It does one of two things. One, it makes it very easy to overeat because it doesn't have that fiber. And secondly, because it lacks some of that fiber, some of that soluble fiber, that's what helps bind to cholesterol and carry it out of the body. So this is the two-pronged approach why whole grains can be a very helpful part of a heart disease prevention program, as well as taking a close look at the type of protein being selected. My general rule of thumb here, your take-home lesson is the less legs it has, the better. So fish, chicken, turkey being better nutritional choices overall than compared to beef and pork. Now, you can get lean selections in any one of those animals, but you'll find more lean choices available in fish and poultry than you will in beef and pork. And then even a plant-based approach to protein would be even better from a nutritional standpoint. But again, not advising everyone to adopt a vegan lifestyle, but there is some evidence to show that a vegan approach or a plant-based approach to eating, we see much better numbers with heart disease prevention. So it's up to you to figure out, okay, is this the right approach for me? When we look at the research about bacon and cold cuts and processed meats, we see it accompanied by slightly higher rates of prostate cancer and other cancers of the gut. So that's why you see those being recommended as avoided. However, we also know that through the processing of those meats, the bacon and the cold cuts, et cetera, it's also bringing up a significant amount of sodium. And that is the one nutrient. When we look at things that we should try to do to improve blood pressures, we have to pay close attention to that salt because that can be a problem for a lot of people when we look at blood pressure management. So this is a picture I've shown before in some of our other classes. I like it because it really speaks to the pattern of food choices that I mentioned before. So I'm not advocating a specific diet you should follow for heart disease prevention, but if you can get food choices that are on the top end of this arrow showing benefit to our heart health, you are going to be much better positioned to continue to lower your risk for heart disease. So this is a combination of studies that looked at food pattern selections and their impact on cardiovascular disease outcomes, and not just cardiovascular disease, but also diabetes and obesity. So not surprisingly, things like fruits and vegetables were near the top of the list of being healthful choices, but you also see nuts, you see fish, you see whole grains, you see beans, you see yogurt. What you also notice is that toward the middle of that double arrow, you see cheese, you see eggs, you see chicken, you see milk, you see butter, you see unprocessed red meat. So that's just regular steak and things like that. While these weren't really shown to be beneficial to our health, they also didn't carry with it some of the same level of quote unquote harm to cardiovascular disease outcomes. So they're more neutral. Again, don't read too much into this and think, oh, well, now cheese is good for me or eggs are good for me. They can be part of a well balanced diet, but we don't want to make sure they're the dominant feature in what we're eating. But towards the bottom of this arrow, are things that we really want to minimize. And again, when I say adopt whatever approach you can where you still like your life, if you can minimize those refined grains and control the amount of starch in your diet to just one, fistful portion at each meal, minimize the added sugars, minimize the processed meats like sausage and bacon and so forth and other high salt foods, you're going to be in a much more successful position when it looks at heart disease prevention. So these are the ones. These are the ones I want you to pay close attention to when we talk, because part of this program is meeting with the health coach. If you have questions about nutrition, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about how often you can are consuming these foods and how can we make these foods part of a sustainable dietary approach to you. Doesn't happen overnight, but again, this is what we want to take a close look at if we're looking to try to prevent heart disease. This is a confusing slide. I know if you look at it, like that's a lot of information. All right, so let me explain this to you. So there have been several studies done on groups of health professionals across the country. Many of you may have heard of the Nurses Health Study. There's also the Health Professionals Study and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. These are long-standing research programs that look at a variety of habits for healthcare professionals, not just food, but other things as well. But through a lot of their research, they found that certain types of foods are associated with regular increases in body weight. So, meaning the more often people selected potato chips in their diet, or potatoes, or fries, or those processed meats and unprocessed red meats, butter, sweets and desserts, so your cakes and your cookies, your refined grains, so that's your white rice and your white pasta and white bread, those were associated with weight gain. Okay. When they selected vegetables, nuts, whole grains, fruits, yogurt, those were associated with weight decreases. Okay. So again, correlation doesn't mean cause here, but these are some of the patterns that we look at and say, oh, okay, I see something here. Not surprisingly, people who consumed sugar sweetened beverages like Pepsi, Coke, lemonade, and such, and 100% fruit juice, so your orange juice, your apple juice, and such, also were associated with small amounts of weight gain over time. And then milk and diet sodas were associated with really no change in body weight. So again, the other thing I like to look at from a heart disease prevention is how many of your calories are you drinking? Yes, I know fruit juice is a good source of vitamins, but it's no way to eat fruit. So fruit juice is one thing in your diet that you should take a long, hard look at. If you're having more than 4 ounces a day, then that's going to be an issue if you're looking to lose weight or lower your risk for heart disease. So the reason we're in the situation we're in terms of energy imbalance is, let's face it, we're dining out more often, or at least we were pre-COVID. We have more sugar sweetened beverages. We have foods that taste delicious. They're very palatable, so they're tough to stay away from. And food is marketed. Every claim that you see on a box of cereal and snack food items is mostly just marketing. When we're looking at food choices, I'd like for you to just instead scrutinize not the front of the package, but the back of the package. What's in it? What's the nutrient content? And then in addition to the energy imbalance where we have more energy coming in, we have less coming out. Drive-through windows, we have fewer places to walk safely. I mean, here in Jacksonville, we have added, some walking paths internally, but we struggle in our environment because it's not safe outside the hospital campus to walk around. And you see that also replicated in some of our neighborhoods too. So if you have access to safe walking areas, safe biking areas, I encourage you to try to take advantage of that because again, as we'll learn later in this program, physical activity is a very powerful antidote to preventing heart disease. So one piece of information I wanted to share with you for later reference, and just like before, we're going to send out copies of this PowerPoint, all the slides that you see today, as well as a link to a post test. Remember, this is a test really just to use for attendance. It's not meant to be a final exam per se, but this is how we're tracking participation. As you go back and look at these slides, if you follow this link, this is the Mayo Clinic weight loss calculator. And what it does is basically estimate your calorie expenditure in a given day. So you type in your height, your weight, your activity levels, and it'll give you an estimation of, okay, here's how many calories that you're burning in a day. To lose weight, we basically have to come in below that number. And how far below that number is a very tricky number to nail down. I can tell people it's anywhere from 500 to 1,000 calories less, but it may not be. So everyone's energy needs for weight loss can be slightly different. How many calories you burn in a day are comprised of three main areas. So this is important to understand when we look at establishing some sensibility about nutrition and weight control. Most of the calories you burn every day are just to keep you alive. They're part of what we call our basal metabolic rate, about 50 to 70%. Another chunk of calories that are burned each day is through our activities. So not just exercise, not just going to the gym or doing the walking pass or riding a bike, but just getting up and moving around, all the things that we do throughout the course of the day. Whenever we're not sitting, these physical activities can account for about 20 to 35% of your daily energy expenditure. Now, if you're somebody who is very active, let's say you're a triathlete and you're training for an upcoming virtual triathlon, that percentage could go way, way up. But for most of us, how many calories we burn in a given day? About 20 to 35% of it is just from our physical activity. And then there's another small sliver that you see there called TEF. What that stands for is the thermic effect of food. And what this means is that every time you have something to eat, you burn calories. That's pretty awesome, right? Just to think when you sit down for breakfast or lunch or dinner and you just eat, that in and of itself burns a small amount of calories. So this is part of how people all of a sudden decided they needed to eat 6 small meals because they're eating more frequently and that can help them lose some weight, but that never really panned out in the research. But you do burn a very small amount of calories each day just through the digestion and absorption of all the foods that you eat, about 10% on average for most adults. So when we look at the weight loss and the numbers that we're looking to achieve, reasonable weight loss is a very vague term, but let's define that as 10%. So you're going to each be asked to focus your attention on one key area after this program is done, after the 6 weeks are up. We're going to have you focus either on nutrition. We're going to have you focus on physical activity. If you're somebody who is smoking, we're going to focus on tobacco cessation. But we also might ask you to focus on weight loss or stress management. And when we look at weight loss, really all we're looking for is a 10% reduction in weight. Even if that 10% still means you're technically overweight or obese, we still see improvements in blood pressure and a lower risk for prediabetes becoming type 2 diabetes. So remember, even if it's just 10% and you're still overweight, we still see some measurable improvements in blood pressure, which can in turn take a lot of pressure off the heart and therefore lower our risk for heart disease. And no matter how what weight you are right now, any type of movement is going to make you healthier. In fact, you could argue that somebody who is overweight but physically fit is actually healthier than somebody who is at a within weight range but is inactive. So physical activity helps you at any weight. One other piece of information I want to share in terms of habits. So again, it's all about trying to navigate yourself to some type of habit change. What are you going to do differently moving forward? And there has been a weight control registry study going on for quite some time. So this is basically the largest investigation of long-term successful weight loss. We got about 10,000 people in this program. And in this program, they are interviewed and asked routinely what they do to keep their weight off. So of those 10,000 people, 98% report modifying their food intake in some way. So whatever they're doing before, 98% of them decided I need to change something if I want to lose weight and keep it off. We can all lose weight. It's the keeping it off that's a problem. 94% increased physical activity, 78% ate breakfast every day, 75% weigh themselves at least once a week. If you are going to weigh yourself, I would say not to do it more than once a week. Once a week is fine, but any more frequent than that, it's not going to give you good information because our weight does fluctuate a little bit from day to day. 62% watch less than 10 hours of TV each week. Who watches 10 hours of TV each week? The average American. And then 90% exercise at least an hour a day. So again, this is purposeful activity that's getting your heart rate up. 90% of these 10,000 people were finding time to do it 1 hour every day. Now, we're not going to start there if we're at 0 hours per day, but you can see, okay, here are some of the statistics. This is what people are doing to keep the weight off. And you have to ask yourself, okay, of these behaviors, which one is going to be most likely easier for you to follow? And how many more can I add? Talking about modifying food intake, physical activity, TV. It's up to you to decide which of those that you can strive for. So we know with long-term weight loss, nutrition still the priority. You see arbitrary figures thrown out that weight loss is 90% diet, 10% exercise. Who knows? That's just a made up number. But If we want to keep weight off, we have to modify some of our nutrition choices. We can't continue to hit the drive-through window. We can't continue to walk up to the food truck and get everything covered in gravy and cheese and expect weight loss to occur. So some type of nutrition change is going to be necessary. The other things that help, getting social support. So whether it's from coworkers, whether it's from a spouse, if you have people that have similar goals for losing weight, you can both keep each other motivated and both keep each other on track when we get those times where we're offered too many temptations. Food intake records also help. In fact, there's research that's been shown that independent of any education program, people that are just tracking their food choices, meaning not asked to make any changes at all, just to track their food choice, actually lost weight. So the simple fact that you just track your food choices makes you more aware of what you're eating, and that awareness helps create opportunities for improvement. Schedule physical activity. So when I say get that activity in, that's easier said than done, but work it into your schedule. Just like you schedule time for this meeting, schedule time for that 20-minute post lunch walk or post dinner time bike ride, whatever's going to work for you, but put it into your calendar, make it an actionable item. Say, ding, it's time for me to go for my walk. I would also ask that you weigh yourself weekly moving forward if weight loss is on your radar. Once a week, not more than that, but once a week. And then you can decide, okay, I noticed in this week and over the past couple weeks, I haven't lost any weight. Why is that? Am I less active? Have I dined out more? What is the deal? So weighing yourself weekly, just like keeping food intake records, that awareness can lend itself to further improvement. And then the last thing I usually try to suggest to people is plan your meals. Give some time in your week, whether it's 10 minutes where you just have a general idea of what you plan to eat. So maybe it's spaghetti one night and rotisserie chicken another night, a veggie lasagna, whatever it is. The simple act of planning those meals does one thing for you that's really going to help long term in terms of weight loss and heart disease prevention, and that is keep you away from the drive through window. Most of the time, when we end up in the drive through windows, because we really have no idea what we're eating for dinner. If you have a weekly menu, you avoid that task. So that's something that I try to have each person strive for. So a couple other things before we wrap up, and hopefully I'll give you some time to ask some questions here. What I typically try to suggest to people, and again, I don't advocate one singular approach to healthy eating. It's really a matter of what's sustainable for you. But we do know that through calorie restrictions, which is what happens when we have to lose weight, if we still get a decent source of protein at our main meals, let's say lunch and dinner, that can help preserve lean body mass, which is what we want to happen. Whenever we're trying to lose weight, we're trying to lose fat. We're not trying to lose muscle. And when I say a small amount of protein, I'm saying about the size of the palm of your hand. So whether it's chicken, turkey, or fish, about that much at lunch and dinner, and maybe some nice protein-rich foods at breakfast. Again, you'll see some ideas in the cookbook that we will send your way. That can help preserve that lean body mass. And the other thing protein can do is it promotes a feeling of fullness. So whenever you had something like a piece of fish or some lean steak, you'll notice that that holds you over a little bit longer than if you were have the same amount of calories in the form of rice or pasta. Add some fiber through fruits and vegetables and whole grains, you have a meal that's going to really hold you over. We talked about refined carbs already because they lack fiber. They're very easy to overeat. But the other thing to take a close look at, besides calorie beverage consumption, take a look at alcohol use. So, right now, watching this webinar, you're all burning fat. I'm burning fat just giving this webinar, just by sitting here. But if I were to be drinking, if I were to decide, you know what, it's 12 o'clock, I'll have a drink. Just kidding, of course, but the science is there. Anytime you're consuming alcohol, you're putting your body at a position where it has to make a choice. It can't store that alcohol anymore, so it has to burn off those calories. So every time you consume an alcoholic beverage, whether it's wine, beer, or liquor, your body stops burning fat until that alcohol is gone. So that natural fat burning that happens just through the course of the day from just sitting there, we press pause on that whenever we're consuming alcohol. So keep that in mind when we look at long-term weight loss. The frequency of alcohol consumption is going to make it more difficult to lose weight because it can suppress natural fat burning at rest. We look at high calorie trigger foods to try to keep them out of sight. If you're somebody who is tempted by potato chips and ice cream, well, the best way to remove that temptation is not even bring it in the house. And then the other thing I want to point out here, most of these are pretty straightforward here, but ask yourself if you're really hungry. And what I mean by that is a lot of times you might find yourself craving certain items, whether it's bacon or chicken wings or potato chips or something like that. Usually our cravings are very high calorie, high salt, high fat items. No one's ever that I know of craved broccoli or kale or anything like that. But what I want you to do though is learn to differentiate hunger from craving. And there's one key thing that differentiates the two, and that is how quickly it comes on. Hunger takes time to build up, whereas cravings for certain food items can be triggered almost instantaneously. If we can wait it out a little bit, you can learn to differentiate the craving from hunger. Again, hunger takes a gradual amount of time to ramp up. Usually, if you've had a decent sized meal, you should expect to be hungry again about 3 or 4 hours later. If you're hungry sooner than that, we got to either A, take a look at what you ate before that, or B, ask yourself, okay, am I just craving it? Like, just smell popcorn being popped right now. Am I really hungry, or I just smell the popcorn that's making me crave something to eat? So, the other action item to do is pack your lunch moving forward. Pack your lunch. Now, a lot of us are dining out a lot less frequently because of COVID-19, but even more so as these restaurants have now reopened to full service, 100% occupancy. Still, the more you can pack your lunch, the better off you can be. Because when we look at calorie counts on menus compared to calorie counts of a sit down bag lunch type meal, on average, every restaurant meal is 50% higher in calories than what you would pack yourself. Doesn't matter where it is, too. Even some of the quote unquote healthier restaurant options still have 50% more calories on average for all of their menu choices. So that's some powerful stuff when we look at, okay, what are some changes that can be done to help you lose weight? So I want to open it up to any questions you might have right now. You can type them up in the chat. I'd be happy to help you now. What I'm going to be sending out this afternoon is a cookbook. This is from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It's about I think last time I checked, it's like 50 or 60 pages. So there are a lot of ideas in here. I'm going to send you the complete PDF, but this is the Keep the Beat cookbook, and it just gives you some ideas for a variety of food choices that all fall within some of those guidelines for heart healthy eating. So again, while I try to get people away from the absolutes in terms of healthy and unhealthy, there are patterns of food selections that can be more healthful. And this cookbook gives you some ideas to kind of point you in that direction. Again, some things to try. There's 20,000 different food choices to make in a supermarket. If you can expand your choices to add one or two new things every month, you might find a new favorite food. And again, that can help sustain this healthy eat approach, help put you in touch with some healthier eating choices that are something that you like. So, having said all that, doesn't look like there's any questions coming in. So hopefully everyone got some good information there. And with that, I will talk to you next week. Have a good day, everybody.